Coming up on the Season 10 premiere of Colonial Crossfire, Democrats square off on stage in Houston, senators and representatives reconvene on the Hill, and Brexit or no Brexit? That's the question hitting the country's new PM. Joining us on the left, Mark McKibben and Lauren Bordeaux. And on the right, Josh Kuttner and Joey Rodriguez. And I'm your moderator, Michael Schnell. From the GWTV studios in Washington, D.C., this is Colonial Crossfire. Hello, GW political junkies, and welcome to the 10th season of Colonial Crossfire. I hope you all had nice summers and that you followed the news coming out of D.C. because, well, apparently it just doesn't stop when we leave. Now, it's going to be quite an interesting year ahead here in the nation's capital. We have a divided Congress, an election on the horizon, and some very, very active Twitter feeds. Get ready for one jam-packed season. Now, to kick things off, we'll unpack the latest from Thursday's Democratic primary debate in Houston. After that, we'll take you up to Capitol Hill and look at some pressing issues on the docket. Pressure from the left on gun legislation, more House GOPers leaving Congress, and official rules for the impeachment inquiry. Or is it an investigation? We'll tackle that later on. And then for rapid fire, what exactly is going on across the pond? Will PM Boris Johnson lead the Brits out of the EU? You ask it, we will debate it. But before we dive into those conversations, let's turn things over to Jessica Nix to fill us in on some headlines you may have missed. Jessica?
Thanks, Michael. First stop, Hong Kong. Let's break down the context. Hong Kong is a part of China. However, since the 1980s, they've had their fair share of autonomy, except in defense and foreign affairs. Hong Kong has their own legal systems, borders, and they enjoy freedom of speech and assembly. But now, China is being accused of tampering down on pro-democracy efforts in Hong Kong. In June, protests broke out over extradition plans for Hong Kong to leave mainland China. These protests are escalating to reflect the wider reform for democracy that Hong Kong citizens want. So far, 14 weeks of clashes have ensued with no end in sight. President Trump has canceled secret plans to meet with the Taliban at Camp David days before the 18th anniversary of 9/11. In 2016, Trump promised to pull all U.S. soldiers out of Afghanistan, and the talks with the Taliban are seen as the first step in completing that promise. If the United States is to leave Afghanistan, a deal with the Taliban will likely ensue. Trump has stated that talks ended after learning a U.S. soldier was killed by the Taliban in Kabul. So what's next? If Trump pulls troops out of Afghanistan, there's fear that international terrorism will increase. National Security Advisor John Bolton is out of the Trump team as of Tuesday, September 10th. In a series of tweets from the president, Trump said Monday night that he told Bolton his services were no longer needed, with Bolton responding on Twitter that he offered to resign. Bolton was Trump's third national security advisor. That's all from the headlines. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Jessica. Weeks of preparation for a 3-hour debate night. Question is, who were the winners? The losers? Do we have any breakout moments? Our student panel is here to discuss this and more. On the left, Mark McKibben, a junior from Sacramento, California, majoring in political communication. Mark is a former intern in the chair's office at the Democratic National Committee. And Lauren Bordeaux, a sophomore from Greenville, North Carolina, studying international affairs. Lauren is the president of the GW College Democrats, and she happens to be the first black president of the organization. And on the right, Josh Kuttner, a junior from Somerset, New Jersey, majoring in political science. Josh is currently the director of public affairs at the GW College Republicans. And Joey Rodriguez, a junior from Dallas, Texas, majoring in political science and psychology. Joey is the director of public relations for the GW College Republicans and a press assistant for the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Last week marked the third Democratic debate in the 2020 election season, but this one was a little bit different, and it's for a couple of reasons. Now, A, it was long. I know that the other two sets of debates were long, but this one just felt really long. And B, there was only one night of debating, which means that C, all 10 candidates who qualified to be on stage stood together. All matchups were on the table. The progressive showdown between Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, a rematch between Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Joe Biden, and one many Americans have been waiting to see, the ideological clash, the middle versus the left, between Senator Warren and Vice President Biden. Talking points, they were memorized, facts were rehearsed, and political jabs were lined up as the top 10 candidates went head-to-head all together on the same stage for the first time this season. And boy, did they get through a lot of content, moving from social to international to economic issues. A lot of ground was covered. Now, since it was the Democratic debate, let's start off with a question about the direction of the Democratic Party. It's it's not new news that the Democratic Party is moving more to the left with more progressive ideals. We saw Senator Sanders, Senator Warren up there putting out progressive ideas. Is this the right way for the Democratic Party to move to achieve their goal of taking President Trump out of the presidency, but also their goal of just appeasing their constituents? Or do we think they're moving a little too much to the left to a point where they may not be able to return to that middle ground? Mark, what do you think?
For the progressive candidates, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, what encourages me particularly about them is that they have defined their candidacies by what they're for, not what they're against. They've articulated coherent policy visions, and I think, frankly, that's much more powerful than defining your candidacy by what you're against.
So are you saying that people like Joe Biden in the middle, or somebody like Kamala Harris a little bit more to the middle, is not articulating their ideas and they're going by what they're against?
No, I don't think that's true at all. I mean, I think, for example, John Hickenlooper, who's now no longer in the race, one of his slogans was "Socialism is not the answer," and I don't think that was a good approach because he was defining his campaign by what he was against. However, I think vast majority of the candidates on that stage last night, it was encouraging to me that they were talking about what they were for. It's not just about being anti-Trump. They're articulating an alternative policy vision for America and talking about how they're going to make people's lives better day to day.
Lauren, what do you think about the direction of your party?
I do definitely think that is moving more left, and because you have people like us who weren't able to vote in 2016 who can vote now, and we're in college and we're learning so much, and that is inspiring us to be more left, and we are. And so we're pushing the party, which I think is very good because that forces them to see other ideas. Do I think it would necessarily win the election? I'm not sure, but I do know that we all need to stand behind each other no matter what.
Josh?
Well, from a policy standpoint, I think there are a lot of important factors being left out of important debates. We focus a lot on healthcare, but what I was looking to see in the healthcare discussion last night, I didn't, was any discussion of quality of care or the impact on research and development that could take place under a transition to a single-payer system. And if we're talking politically, no, I don't think it's wise. I think that the old mantra that elections are won in the middle does hold true. I think that the presidency runs through the Midwest, and I think while Sanders does have some appeal to voters there, I personally, after having spoken to people in that region, I don't see how you're going to be able to take back the White House from President Trump by moving further and farther from the ideological core of the country.
Joey, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the Democratic Party is moving a lot more to the left. This happens from decades to decades. You know, policies that were considered extremely progressive end up being the mainstream decades in the future. So I think that debates like this one that were extremely long, but I think they're extremely important because it allows people that are in the Midwest that don't really have a candidate maybe that they see that represents them, except for maybe Joe or Pete. This is an extremely important time for them to be able to decide who they think is best to represent them if they're a part of the Democratic Party. And so when we're talking, you said that Kamala Harris is a little bit more to the middle, and I sort of disagree with that. She's like the third most progressive Democrat in the Senate. And then after Joe Biden, you also have the other two most progressive Democrats in the Senate, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, right? So I think that the top Democrats right now, it's a race for like, what is the Democratic Party running for, and what do they want? Who do they want to beat Donald Trump? And right now, I think the best person among those people in the Midwest, I think Joe Biden is the choice for them, as opposed to the more progressive Democrats that we see.
So another topic I want to bring up that was spoken about in the debate was the issue of Afghanistan. Now, as we noted in the headlines last week, President Trump rescinded an invitation for the Taliban to come visit Camp David to discuss how to pull troops out of Afghanistan. A lot of the candidates on stage last week said that it's not necessary for her to have talks with the Taliban to pull our military men and women out of war. Do you agree with that? Josh, we'll go to you first.
Well, you know, I'm not in the backstage deliberation, so we don't have access to all the information that the Commander-in-Chief is looking at. Personally, I just don't think it's great optics to invite the Taliban here to Camp David, personally, but I'm not privy to all the information they are. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Lauren, your thoughts?
I don't think that it's necessarily that good, since if we invite the Taliban to Camp David, because that's not helping our security. It's not helping the security of Afghanistan, and so that creates instability, and that's not the whole point of bringing our troops home and hoping to redo our military and help rebuild Afghanistan in a different way that's not involving the Taliban.
Joey, I want to bring the question back a little bit more about the wider picture. Do you think the talks are necessary? And that maybe it wasn't right to do the talks during the week of 9/11 and bring the Taliban to Camp David, but the wider conversation, the greater topic here, do you think that talks are necessary with the Taliban to take our troops out of Afghanistan?
You know, I'm not too sure about that. Whenever I first saw the headline, Donald Trump wanting to meet with Taliban at Camp David, I was pretty shocked. I was like, why is he meeting with the Taliban? These were part of the big bad guys, Al Qaeda as well, back in the day, and so I was wondering why. So no, I don't think that we need to talk to the Taliban to figure out what we need to do to bring our troops home. But also part of the debate question was that when troops were taken away from Afghanistan and brought back home, obviously ISIS was able to spring up and take over a lot of land, and so what is the right direction to go about bringing our troops home while making sure that no one is like ISIS is able to
Mark, I want to
bring
get you in
back
on
up
this
again.
topic. What do you think?
I mean, Michael, let's be clear about why this didn't work out. Donald Trump wanted a photo op of him signing the peace deal with the Taliban at Camp David. And he pulled out because the Taliban were not going to give him that photo op. So it's very clear to me that Donald Trump is more concerned with him getting credit for everything than he is with actually brokering peace with the Taliban.
Josh,
Now,
I'm just going to, Josh, if you want to jump in.
I don't know 100% that Donald Trump is, overly eager to pose for a photo op with the Taliban. But what I do think it's important to recognize is that this president has been willing to discuss, negotiate with our adversaries in ways that past people haven't. We saw that with the summit with North Korea, the chairman Kim Jong-un. And these talks can be important, but they must lead to substantive change. I think that's the important caveat. So the meeting with the Taliban in general, negotiating, talking with them, can be done, but it must be done in a substantive, meaningful way.
I want to move on to another topic that was a big part of the debate last week, healthcare. So according to the Census Bureau numbers, the number of uninsured Americans increased by 2 million this year. That's the first increase the survey has reported since 2009. Now, of course, healthcare was a big topic at the debate. So it seems as though there are two sides to the healthcare debate within the Democratic Party. There are the members who want to have just a public option, and then there are members who want to offer a public option, but also allow Americans to be able to use those private insurers and have their doctors that they would prefer rather than going onto the public option. Why isn't the choice okay? It seems like the choice would be the best of both worlds for those who want to buy in or opt into the public option, and for those who want to keep their private doctors. So what's the debate here? Why is the debate here, and what do you think is the most convincing argument? Lauren, we'll go to you first.
So I think that the issue is with having a public and a private system is that you have to uphold both to the same standards, and that requires more money. And some people who believe that they shouldn't pay into the public option because that's not supporting them, they won't want to do it. And so you have a lot of divide between that. And so I definitely think it's between the standard.
But why can't Americans choose? If they want to buy into the public option, they can. If they want to keep their private insurer, they can. If they want to keep their doctor, they can.
I like Pete Buttigieg said last night, like he trusts the American people. I trust the American people. I just think that it gives all of us a greater access to health care when we have only one option, hopefully being the public option. But I do understand choosing, but I'd rather have a public option with everybody paying in, so then it's the same quality of health care for everyone instead of people having health inequalities.
Josh, you're shaking your head. Tell me why.
Well, I just think it's important as a fundamental principle that we allow for Americans for the freedom to choose in the marketplace, what healthcare provider they'd like to have. And once again, like I pointed out earlier, a piece that's missing of this is the quality of care. If we switch to a single-payer system, from the studies I've seen, that would greatly hurt our research and development, which has helped to propel healthcare really globally. And also, when we talk about providing a choice, we're not saying that the system is perfect right now. Certainly not. There's certainly many things that need to be improved. But we can look at things like middlemen, like pharmacy benefits managers who have helped contribute to the overwhelming rise in healthcare costs overall.
I want to backtrack a little bit quickly. You say that you want the American people to have the right to choose. Is that the right to choose their own private doctor within their private insurer, or is that the right to choose if they want to buy in or opt into a public option, or if they want to keep that private insurer?
I believe as a general principle, if you're going to go the way the Democrats seem to, right, just looking at it from that stance, you have to have an option of some sort. I don't think it's right to say everyone must pay into the single payer system, and we're going to take, was the number used last night, or last week was 149 million Americans off their private plans. I think it's putting way too much faith in the government that it will be able to efficiently run the entire nation's healthcare system.
Mark, what do you think?
There is no meaningful purpose for private insurance. There's absolutely none. As Elizabeth Warren said last night, no one likes their insurance company. They like their doctor, they like their hospital, and that will all stay under a single payer system. So there's no purpose for private insurance. Now,
Why is there no purpose for private insurance?
because private insurance doesn't actually provide care. Private insurance is a middleman. They do administrative tasks, and that money could be funneled into direct care for patients rather than paying private insurance companies a premium. And so I think, but the question of what is actually going to get passed post-2020, assuming Democrats take the House, the Senate, and the presidency, is the reality is that I don't think there are the votes for the elimination of private insurance. So my position is that Democrats should pass the most progressive plan possible. And in order to do that, they need to eliminate the legislative filibuster. It is ridiculous that Bernie Sanders is proposing a single-payer healthcare system, and yet he refuses to support eliminating the legislative filibuster. That needs to happen.
Really quickly, in your opinion, what do you think is the most progressive plan that could be passed through this Congress?
I don't know. I think I think either public option added to Obamacare. I think probably a public option added to Obamacare. Look, I personally support single-payer healthcare. I think we should eliminate private insurance, but in reality, I'm not sure that's what's going to happen.
Joey, why are you shaking your head?
Yeah, Americans are scared. Amy Klobuchar brought up on page 8 of Medicare for All, Bernie Sanders' bill, is private health insurance will be no more, is what it says. And people realize that when Obama said, the Affordable Care Act will allow you to keep your doctor, allow you to stay on the plan that you like, that just didn't end up happening, and premiums are raised for everyday Americans. So on a case when they're seeing, oh my gosh, we're going to move to another Medicare, a different, more progressive one, am I going to be able to keep what I like, my doctor, my healthcare plan? For a college student like me, I don't need all of the things that Medicare for All might give you or what the Affordable Care Act gives you. I don't need much healthcare at all. At the minimum, stuff to buy, flu shot, and that's it.
I'll respond quickly. The reason why people lost their doctor under the Affordable Care Act was because of the lack of a public option. If we provide that to people, those problems are going to be eliminated. So I think the problem that Joey is talking about is really an emperor with no clothes.
All right, we can talk about healthcare for days, months, years, like we have been, but I want to ask one more question really quick, rapid fire round. Who won the debate in your opinion? Joey, you first.
This one's a good one. Josh and I were talking about it before. We disagreed on I think Elizabeth Warren won the debate. For me, I don't think I saw a moment where she wasn't giving a strong, passionate speech and where a lot of people on the stage agreed with her. Lots of claps in the crowd, and I think she is having a good progressive debate, whereas it sounds like it could be mainstream as well.
Joey, Josh, who won?
Go ahead.
I think Vice President Biden won by default. I think there wasn't a lot of movement. I think Biden was the sharpest we've seen him, especially in that first hour of the debate when most people were going to be watching. I think he deftly handled the conversation on healthcare with Senators Warren and Sanders. I think my Senator Cory Booker was also very, very well-spoken throughout the debate. How much it matters given where he's at in the polls, I'm not sure. But those were the two that struck me as that I was most impressed by.
Lauren, who took home the win?
I definitely think Senator Warren did, because besides her policies being amazing, she also held her own and she wasn't attacking people like we saw last night with Julian Castro. And so she did it in a very elegant and eloquent way.
Mark, finish it off.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a single winner. I thought Joe Biden did very well. He reminded people why they liked Joe Biden. I thought Pete Buttigieg did very well discussing his policy plans in his past. I thought Beto O'Rourke had a really good standout moment with his gun violence answer. And I loved Elizabeth Warren's performance because everyone knows Elizabeth Warren's how. They know how she's going to implement the policies, but I think she did a really good job last night of articulating her why, her background, why she's so passionate about the issues she's passionate about. And that made me tear up a couple times in the debate when she talked personally.
Fair enough. I see more 2020 conversation in our future. That's one thing for sure. But we'll have to end the conversation there. After this, we'll make our way up to Capitol Hill and we'll break down some pressing and pretty controversial issues on the agenda. Stay tuned.
And this is GWTV.
Nailed that. Good job, guys.
Welcome back. We'll now switch gears and we'll take you up to Capitol Hill for a little segment that we like to call News from the Hill. Last week, senators and representatives made their way back to Washington after a lengthy summer recess, which, I guess you could say they did deserve it after what was quite a busy summer. There was Robert Mueller's testimony, controversial tweets by the president, followed by pushback from 4 non-white Democratic congresswomen. And did I mention the Mueller testimony? But now that the summer is over, our congressmen and women were thrown right into action with a laundry list of issues to take up. There's pressure on Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to make a move on gun control measures following the 2 massacres this summer in El Paso, Texas and Dayton, Ohio. There's impeachment. Just recently, House Democrats agreed on rules as more caucus members are calling for impeachment. And the list of GOPers not seeking re-election in Congress, it's growing. We're up to 13 House members now with the expectation of more to come. So why exactly are so many Republicans leaving Congress? There's no clear answer. Something we do know is that there is a lot to unpack here, so we'll get started. We'll kick things off with a question about gun control measures, and I'm going to start by talking a little bit about a poll. In a recent NPR, PBS NewsHour, and Marist poll on the subject of background checks, who wants background checks? 83% of the voters polled said they want background checks. Now, 77% of gun owners polled said they want background checks. In terms of who wants gun licenses, 72% of voters are in favor of gun licenses, 57% of gun owners are in favor, and 58% of Republicans are in favor of gun licenses. According to this poll, it seems that the American people, seem like they're ready for gun control measures, especially gun owners and especially Republicans with more than that 50% threshold. So I guess the question is, why have Mitch McConnell, why have the president been so slow to move on this order if the American people seem like they're pretty ready for it? Joey, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Texas, so obviously the gun culture is really big there from the South. I think it's sort of like a false premise that Republicans aren't representing their constituency. Like you said, it's only half of Republicans, and especially if you talk to Republicans in the South, no, they don't want this kind of gun control measures. Those would be people, probably Republicans in California, gun owners there, or people
when
in
you
the
say
north.
these kinds of gun control measures, which ones are you specifically talking about?
Sure, like licensing, I think that's much more controversial than universal background checks, because federally licensed firearm dealers, they already have to do mandatory background checks. So it's not like there are just no background checks happening in the first place. I don't want criminals to be able to have guns, especially if it's like a dangerous offense. No right in the Constitution is absolute. What we're talking about here is what is a reasonable regulation of those rights.
What is that reasonable?
So yeah, sure. So universal background checks, I think that's something that a lot of people can agree on, and for the most part of gun purchases, that is what's going to happen.
So so you say that you think background checks are reasonable. So there's a bill on background checks in Congress. Why hasn't it moved quicker? Especially you say you're from Texas, especially after the El Paso massacre.
So the reason why that's the bill in the Senate is different is that's for gun shows and other places that aren't federally licensed firearm dealers. And so that.
So you're saying background checks for federally licensed dealers.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I stand on that issue yet, and so I think it's something that needs to be debated at the very least.
Josh, you seem like you wanted to jump in.
Well, sure. I think we're missing an important part of the conversation. So Republicans have not done nothing on this issue. Certainly, there's room to improve.
They've been slow recently.
There's room to improve, but there is a background check system in place for those federally licensed dealers, and the Fix NICS bill to more fully fund that background check system was passed by the Republican Congress in the 115th Congress and signed into law by President Trump. However, this bill, like we've been saying, deals with not federally licensed dealers. Personally, I'm not 100% sure where I stand on this issue. My former boss, Brian Fitzpatrick, was one of the 8 Republican House members to vote for the bill. But I also hear those concerns with people. He's from Texas. I'm from New Jersey. I'm not as familiar with how normal it is to lend your gun to your friend, things like that. That we've seen concerns raised about on the right. But I think it's important we discuss the bill and we bring it to the floor for debate, at least.
Lauren, what are your thoughts here?
I definitely think, like going back to the first part of the question, that it's just Trump not wanting to lose a base. Trump not wanting to lose his base. So that's why they've been really slow to move on it. But of course I support this bill because I don't know how many massacres it takes for people to realize that not only is gun violence something that just occurs in spurts, but this is every day. This is systematic.
So let me ask you something. I think something that the Democrats are struggling with is they keep putting bills through the House and they keep being stalled in the Senate. What do you think Democrats can do to get this legislation that they so very want passed through, and that clearly more than half of Americans want to see passed through as well? What do you think the move is, the strategic move is for your party leaders?
I think it's going to have to be bipartisan, and so it's going to have to be bipartisan in the sense that we may have to just get down to the nitty-gritty of like who gets background checks, or this certain amount of magazines, or these types of guns. Get nitty-gritty with it, because I think that's what's holding us back with Republicans, because they don't want something so broad and overarching. Is that right?
That's
okay.
fair, yeah.
So we're going to have to do something more detailed, which is unfortunate because that's time-consuming. And so who knows how many shootings are and everything that goes on every day that's going to occur more now.
Mark, I want you to hop in here.
I want to answer your question, which is why have Republicans been on slow in this? And the reason why is because Donald Trump and the Republican Party is bought and paid for by an organization, the National Rifle Association, that would allow limitless numbers of children to bleed on the floors and on sidewalks from gun violence, as long as they maximize the profits of gun manufacturers and gun sellers. With respect to my friends on the other side, I don't really understand how you can be against universal not have a position on universal background checks, because Congressman O'Rourke talked about the Odessa shooting last night, where, as I just said, a mother watched her daughter bleed on the sidewalk for an hour because there were too many people shot for the ambulance to address everybody. And the fact is that massacre happened because the shooter in that case used a loophole to buy a gun, and a loophole that would have been prevented by the 2013 Manchin-Toomey bill. The only way we're going to make progress on the issue is we vote that politicians bought and paid for by the NRA the hell out of office.
Josh, quick word, then we got to move on.
It's important that we close those loopholes, and how we do that is not by essentially blaming Republicans for the death of innocent civilians. I think that attack is is unfair. I don't think that the argument is, should we prevent these mass shootings? Every loss of life we experience from gun violence is tragic. However, we need to address this in a civil way and make sure our policy is carefully crafted, like you said, so it's not overarchingly broad.
So
then support H.R. 8. There is no reason not to support H.R. 8. H.R. 8 eliminates the loopholes that happen that allow people like the Odessa shooter to buy guns like that. There is no reason not to support that legislation. Give me a good reason not to support that legislation.
To be careful, like I said, I believe I would support that legislation. My former
then show
boss
it with your
did.
actions.
My former boss did. Well, I'm not a member of Congress.
Let me step in
hold
here.
Hold on
Okay.
one moment. I just wanted to say that the way we'll achieve this is not by demonizing each other. It's by discussing with one another serious policy issues.
I'm done with discussions. I want action. We need to stop little children from being shot with guns. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to be civil about this. I want to vote politicians out of office who have refused to stop blood being spilled. It is a human right not to get shot. And yes, I will be bullish about human rights because that is what I believe and that is what this country was founded on.
I want to move on. We can talk a lot about gun control, but we have to move on to the issue of impeachment. Speaker Pelosi, she's been in the middle of this issue. She hasn't called for impeachment, but she hasn't said she's fully against it. She's really just stayed in that middle area. So young politicians here, I want to ask what you think the right strategy is, the right way to go about this is. So we'll go to the Republicans first. Would you rather see the speaker stay in the middle, would you rather see the speaker come out against impeachment, which could cause a cleavage within the Republican Party? She could alienate those people who don't want impeachment, but she could please those who do want impeachment. Or would you rather see her stay on the sidelines and see the Democrats come off as a bit unorganized and disarray? For example, they don't know if it's an impeachment inquiry, an impeachment investigation. Looking from the outside from your party, what would you prefer? What do you think is most beneficial for your party that Speaker Pelosi does? Either of you can jump in.
So we had a discussion about this in my U.S. political parties class. What is best for the Democratic Party? What's best for the Republican Party? Whether or not to move forward with impeachment. I'd say what's best for the Democratic Party is to not move forward with impeachment because inevitably you will not win on impeachment. In the Senate, Donald Trump will not get convicted.
So you think it's better for Speaker Pelosi to stay on the sidelines rather than take a stand?
Yeah, so I think it's better for Speaker Pelosi not to stay on the sidelines. She should be speaking about
stay on the sidelines in terms of not making a
I think
stand.
she should just move forward with allowing her base, the Democratic Party, to do whatever investigation they want to do, but moving forward with the articles of impeachment, and then moving forward if he is impeached, then in the Senate they won't win. So it's not a good move for Democrats because it's just when Bill Clinton was impeached, not convicted in the Senate, obviously he moved forward and his approval ratings were in the 70s.
Lauren, I want to ask you a question now. I want to ask you on the same topic. Would you rather see Speaker Pelosi take a stance, possibly alienate half of the Democratic Party, or would you rather her still not take that stance, not cause that cleavage, but still see this sort of illusion of disarray and disorganization within the party?
Well, I think part of her job is to help organize the party. So I think that she needs to take a stance wherever that may be. But I do think just the process of impeachment is very complicated, and what we have to do with Trump, there's so many things. I mean,
well, let me just go back for a second. Would you rather? So you're saying that you'd rather see her take a stance to have the illusion of looking organized, but then again, isn't her job as the leader of the party to lead the main idea of the party and the general consensus of the party? So do you think it's a bit unfair for her to take a stance when she knows that half of her base doesn't agree with that stance?
I don't think it's necessarily unfair per se, but I'm speaking in the sense that like this is helping the party possibly move forward, and if taking a stance and agreeing with impeachment and moving forward if that's what's going to take, or the opposite of not agreeing and guys we need to think of something else, then that's okay too.
Okay, I want to move on to one last topic really quickly. We're basically out of time. Like I mentioned in the tease, a lot of House GOPers are stepping down from their seats in Congress. They're saying, I'm not going to run for re-election in 2020. We are now up to 13 House members, a lot of them coming from Texas. My question here is, why do we think that a lot of these House GOPers aren't looking for re-election? I mean, for a couple reasons. This could give them opportunity for the Democrats to increase their majority in 2020, but also considering President Trump is trailing behind the top 5 candidates in the head-to-head matchups. I mean, do you think it's smart for House members, House Republicans to be dropping out? And then what do you think that says about the 2020? I know it's a loaded question, but if we can have a quick answer. Joey, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. So obviously Will Hurd dropped out as well, and so that's, he's loved by the Republican Party, and so it's sad to see. The reason why I think House GOPers are not wanting to run for re-election is because there isn't a lot of bipartisanship happening in the House. It's run by the Democrats. I guess the American people spoke for that time. But again, they're not able to pass things that they promised their voters that they wanted to do or focus on in the House, because that's not what Democrats are focusing on.
But then they're putting up the opportunity of the House to become more blue in 2020. Then wouldn't it make it harder for Republicans to be heard, and wouldn't it make it harder for them to pass that legislation?
I think they're tired of gridlock. I think they're tired of not being able to talk about what they want to talk about, not being able to pass what they want to pass. So I think when people go into the House with this vision of wanting to move forward with whatever they ran on, and for so long they may not have been able to pass it, then it's something that you get tired of.
Laura, I'm going to give you a quick word on this.
I don't agree with that at all. as you can see in America, there's this demographic shift with politics, and as we saw in North Carolina special election, especially 9, that not only are Democrats in urban areas, but they're now in suburban areas, with McCready winning that Charlotte-Mecklenburg, that other county, and Robeson County, that the Democratic Party is going into slowly going into rural areas from suburban areas. And me being from North Carolina District 3, and I live in a rural area, there's definitely more Democrats, and the ideology is going towards there. So GOP just won't win anymore.
I wish we could keep talking about these topics. They're really important, but we're out of time. We don't have enough time. Next time, we'll touch on them again. So we're going to have to end that there. But after this break, it's rapid fire, so stay with us.
Do you want to just practice fake headlines, do our anchor voices?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Okay.
On this week's episode of G Week, there is another election scandal.
And former Vice Provost Peter Kay has been spotted back on campus rocking a brand new bandana. Boy, does he look sharp.
And this year's Spring Fling performer is anticipated to be none other than the Cash Me Outside girl, Behad Behabi.
Catch all this and more on G Week.
Yeah, this is stuff that would probably happen at GW.
Yeah, I think so too.
Our panel joins us now again for rapid fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. And the first topic we have on our list is Brexit. Now, the world has been watching the issue of Brexit unfold since June of 2016. That was when the country decided that it was going to leave the EU. Former British PM Theresa May, she tried to strike a deal, but when 3 of her votes for Brexit were rejected, she threw in the towel. We're now over 2 years later, and the Brits, they're still in limbo with no deal. But time is running out. The deadline to strike a deal is October 31st, and on top of that, there's a new sheriff in town. You may have heard of him. He's a guy named Boris Johnson. Now, Johnson has vowed to deliver on Brexit. In fact, according to The Guardian, he said he would rather, quote, die in a ditch than ask the EU for another extension on the end of the month deadline. So I guess the question is, what are your predictions? Like I said, we've been watching the issue of Brexit ebb and flow and grow over the years, so the deadline is approaching, and it seems like it's a pretty hard deadline this time. There are so many possibilities. Will we see an extension? Will we see a deal struck between Britain and the EU? Will we see a no-deal Brexit? I mean, so much can happen. Mark, what are your predictions?
Michael, a no-deal Brexit really scares me. I think it will usher in unlimited, unknown amounts of suffering in terms of food being delayed, medical supplies being delayed. So the fact that Boris Johnson is using what I think is unconstitutional means by British law to pursue a no-deal Brexit is incredibly concerning.
Lauren?
Well, I think the future of not just Great Britain but Europe is at stake, because Great Britain is a great contributor to the EU. So in the way that they're heading with a no deal, because it's going to be hard to work out trade relations in less than a month, Britain will definitely suffer, and most probably go into a recession.
Josh?
I won't pretend to be an expert on British politics, definitely. My guess is as good as any. It seems like, though, that Boris Johnson is really dead set, as he just described his quote.
It was some
on
quote.
a Brexit one way or another. My big takeaway from it, though, is this shows us really kind of the irresponsibility of governing by referenda and the dangerous outcomes that can come.
Joey?
Yeah, this one's a tough one. I'm a big fan of watching House of Commons live streams and highlights on YouTube. It's
Is that like C-SPAN for Britain?
Yeah. Essentially, it's
More
really
entertaining.
it's very entertaining debate. There are Conservative Party members just leaving during the debate while Boris Johnson is speaking to the other side, and so this is a House of Commons in not in agreeing on anything right now, and I think a no-deal Brexit will eventually be bad. So I don't know where I stand on that, though.
We did have a member of Congress, though, eating a bucket of fried chicken during a hearing once, so I don't know. We got to talk a little bit about the entertainment part. But anyway, we'll move on to the next topic. In a narrow victory, Republican Dan Bishop won the special election in North Carolina's 9th District, an election that was held after officials raised questions regarding the district's 2018 results, questions of Republicans committing voter fraud. Now, aside from that aspect, the numbers are what make this so interesting and so important. In 2016, President Trump carried this district, one with a population of over 750,000 people, by a large margin, nearly 12 points. Now, this time around, that margin shrunk, and it shrunk by a lot, and that's what's important here. Bishop only topped Democrat Dan McCready by 2 percentage points. That's within the span of 2 years, a Trump lock transformed into a 2-point marginal win for Republicans. But even bigger than that, this is a district that's been red since 1963. And this time around, it came in really close territory of flipping. So my question is this a sign for 2020? This time around, will the numbers be different? Josh, what do you think?
I think it's really hard to take a look at this race and say this is going to apply everywhere in 2020. When
Absolutely. Greater
when you have
idea.
these one-off special elections, you have millions of dollars of outside spending pouring in that wouldn't otherwise have taken place because it was viewed as a bellwether by the media until Dan Bishop won. But I think what is certain is that both of these men, I think, would have made better members than Mark Harris. I think it was good that the people of North Carolina had another election to sort these things out.
But bring it back to the question, this Trump won this by 12 points, and I know not as follow-ups, just to refocus the question a little bit. It went from being won by 12 points to being won by 2 points. What does that say?
I think it says that this is a special election that's not indicative of national trends. I think North Carolina is holding strong.
Fair enough. Lauren?
I disagree. I think this shows how the GOP is losing suburban ground. And also with this special election, look what went into it. He had the second highest funded campaign. And not only did you have Trump go there to support him, but you had Pence, and also you had another top figure of the GOP. So it shows them almost scrambling, and I think this is the GOP realizing we need to reach out more, or something else is going to happen with 2020.
Joey, does this say anything about the GOP or 2020?
You know, I don't want to extrapolate this one election with so much money into it to the rest of the United States congressional elections. What I do want to say is what the House GOP, what the Senate GOP, and when these candidates are running need to focus on is what the Republican Party has done or what the Democratic Party has not done, things like that. And I think that's what people should focus on, and I think that those are important ideals to focus on, as opposed to focusing on just this one election and saying Republicans are losing in suburban districts. I don't think it's indicative
Fair
at all.
point. Mark, last word?
I mean, look, this loss sucked for Democrats. I read my Morrison and Faulkner reading from my class with a little bit more of a dampened heart after Dan McCready lost, so that's definitely true. I'm not going to make any statements about what it means for 2020. I think you have to take each race case by case basis, and yeah, this was disappointing.
All right, we're now going to move on to a pretty interesting topic. So, some revelations were uncovered from Russia this past week. Now, according to CNN, the U.S. successfully extracted one of its top Russian spies in 2017 on concerns that his safety was in jeopardy. That spy was one of the U.S.'s key sources in Russia. The individual, who of course will remain unnamed, he has close ties to the Kremlin and had been on assignment for several years. But his safety, that's the main focus here. CNN reports that top U.S. officials were concerned that classified information was mishandled by the Trump administration, which could put the spy in danger. In May 2017, President Trump, he had discussed highly classified information with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the Russian ambassador to the U.S. at the time, Sergei Kislyak. This was information about ISIS that had been provided by Israel. This leak of information was a concern to intelligence officials, which prompted the extraction of the spy. So the question here is, do you think President Trump had an effect and had a role in ousting this spy and his extraction? Do you think that he had a direct relation to this? It's just such an interesting topic and something we don't see every day and just in this realm. So I want to know what your thoughts are, Lauren.
It is definitely complex. And I know when I was reading up on it, Russia released a statement that said, well, we extracted the spy because we didn't want to put the Trump administration at risk. And so I don't know if that at risk means outing him or means that he had some ties with it. I think that all of this involvement with Russia is very complicated, and it's unfortunate because there's so much gray area with the American people, and this doesn't put more trust into the president, and I don't trust him personally.
Mark?
I'm not going to pretend like I know what information the intelligence community has, because I don't. What I will say, though, is that, look, Donald Trump has shown repeatedly, time and again, that he has no respect for our intelligence agencies. He has repeatedly sided with Vladimir Putin about Russian interference in the elections over the consensus among the 17 intelligence agencies that Russia did interfere in this election. So I think it's disappointing, but it's not surprising, because Donald Trump will do anything to make his best friend, Vladimir Putin, more proud of him.
Josh?
Yeah, I think Mark was right in the part where he said that we're not privy to all the information the intelligence community is, so it's really hard to make an accurate assessment from the outside in. We've had a lot of reports come out in the past few years that haven't ended up materializing. As far as handling classified information goes, just to be consistent, every public official, including the president, should be handling this information with the utmost care and security.
Joey, last word.
Yeah, when I was going about reading this, I thought the information was extremely confusing. There were a lot of things that were conflicting.
A lot of layers.
Russia
very
will
complex.
say that he was low in the administration, and the U.S. says he was a top administration official getting information for the United States. And so, I don't know whether or not it's the administration, the U.S. administration, unfortunately leaked information or stuff like that. I think it's unfortunate if that is what happened. I think it's extremely important to make sure that our spies abroad are able to perform their jobs without harm to their life.
Really interesting, complex topic. I wanted to get it in because it's something we don't see every day, but we're going to have the end of the debate there. Mark McKibben, Lauren Bordeaux, Josh Kuttner, Joey Rodriguez, you guys were rock stars. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. When we come back, Willow Hassan has our debate fact check. Stay with us.
Hi, Colonials. Did you know there are hundreds of ways for you to volunteer with GW? Each year, over 1,500 alumni, parents, and friends contribute thousands of hours to make our community stronger. There are countless ways you can volunteer, so it's easy to choose an opportunity that is most meaningful to you, like connecting with students and alumni based on your student involvement, identity, or personal interests. Getting involved with your local alumni network. Mentoring a current student via our online mentoring platform. Connecting with prospective students through undergraduate admissions opportunities, serving on an industry network leadership council, becoming a social media ambassador. The list goes on. No matter where you are in the world or how much time you have to give, you can connect and volunteer with GW. And the best part, it's easy to get involved. Just visit alumni.gwu.edu/volunteer to learn more about these and other opportunities. Because of your service to GW, you are able to make a direct impact on the lives of former, current, and future students. We look forward to working with you. Raise high.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact checkers monitor our debate. Willow Hassan is here to fill us in on what we missed. Willow?
Thanks, Michael. Our debaters came prepared for today's debate with very few errors. However, some false claims need to be addressed. Democrat Mark McKibben said that Americans lost their doctors because of a lack of a public option with the Affordable Care Act. It should be clarified that in 2014, within the first 4 months of the act passing, 278,000 people did have to enter the individual insurance market, but it was because their new plan no longer was being accepted by their previous doctor, not because there wasn't a public option. Mark also claimed that H.R. 8 eliminates the loopholes that the Dayton shooter used to obtain his weapon. It is important to note that H.R. 8 is a background check bill. It doesn't affect loopholes. And for the record, the Politico, Washington Post, and an external investigation from BBC all showed that the Dayton shooter would have passed a background check if subject to one. Republican Joey Rodriguez claimed that there is a bill in the Senate for reform within gun shows and not for federally licensed gun owners. It is true that the bill mentioned, H.R. 8, does cover individual sales, trades, and gun show sales and does not cover federal license programs. However, this bill is being debated in the House and has not yet reached the Senate. That's all for the fact check team. Michael, back to you.
Thanks, Willow. All right, well, that's the end of this episode of Colonial Crossfire and the kickoff of Season 10. 10 years of Colonial Crossfire. It's a big deal. It's a long time. Be sure to check us out online at www.gw-tv.com and follow us on Instagram and Twitter and like us on Facebook. And if you have strong political beliefs and you want to voice them to the GW community, please let us know. Reach out to the Crossfire team via email or social media. We'd love to have you on the show. For all of us here at GW TV, I'm Michael Schnell. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.